He was the type of man who loved to break the rules, but rules exist for a reason. The Peddler's Nose by Jack Williamson. Read by Karl. The peddlers came to Earth across the empty immensities of space after whiskey. He knew the planet was under quarantine, but his borders had left him at the mercy of his thirst. Ultimately, the root of that merciless thirst was his nose. He was a thin, tiny man, and his crooked nose enormous. The handicap could have been corrected, but he was born on a frontier world where the difficult dilemmas of freedom and responsibility had not yet been solved. He was allowed to grow twisted with the knowledge of his ugliness. Damned by genetic accident, he spent his life in flight from salvation. By the time his deformity had made a petty criminal of him, he came to defend it as the most tender part of himself. When he was in a laboratory clinic for the removal of his social maladjustments and the excess nasal tissue that lay beneath him, he escaped rehabilitation and drifted out to the fringes of civilization where the law was less efficient. Never bold, he settled at last into the shabby occupation of vending cheap novelty toys. Even that humble calling had its risks. He had been forced to make his pitch without a vendor's license on the last roll behind. He had to leave in such haste he had no time to buy his usual supplies. His nerves were not so good as they had been. Aboard the flyer, he had to gulp down 3 stiff drinks before his hands were steady enough to set the automatic pilot, and the raw alcohol seemed to hit him more swiftly than common, so his vision began to blur and double before he had finished the adjustments. In his frightened befuddlement, he mistook an 8 for a 3, and overlooked a decimal point, and turned the planet's electro dial 1 space too far. His intended goal had been another frontier world, a few light years away, where immigration was still unrestricted, and the pioneers still hardy enough to let their children buy his toys. His heirs, however, made Earth his destination. The robot pilot warned him instantly. Although the filter had been battered and abused by several generations of outlaws bolder than himself, it had saved him many times from destruction, and it was still a sturdy, space-worthy neutronic craft. A gong crashed. A red light flickered above the competent mechanism, and they spoke to him sternly. Caution, do not take off. Destination dialed is far beyond normal operating range. Caution, check darts and dials for possible error. Caution. He was normally cautious enough, but those 3 drinks had magnified his panic. Already too far gone to understand the warning, he stabbed a shaky finger at the button that cancelled it. Before he could find the takeoff lever, however, the signal rang and flashed again. Caution, rapped that hard, mechanical voice. Do not take off. Destination dialed is under quarantine. All contact prohibited. Impatiently, too drunk to think of anything except escape, he pulled the takeoff lever. The signal stopped, and the flyer took him to Earth, across the distances of light centuries that might have staggered the sober man. Human civilization was an expanding globe, spreading out to the galaxy at almost half the speed of light, as the colonists hopped from star to star, and that long flight took him to what was then the outside of it, back toward the half-forgotten center. The voyage wasn't too long to him, however, and the flyer required no more attention. He caught the invisible winds of radiant neutrinos that rose out of the novae to blow forever to the galaxies, and it was, swiftly at such a speed that time was slowed almost to a stop for everything aboard, through the working of relativity. The peddler drank and slept and dreamed uneasy dreams of men with scalpels who wanted to remove his nose. He woke and slept and drank again until his inadequate supplies were gone. As originally built, the flyer would have identified him to the Destination Port Authority, waited for orders, and obeyed them automatically. Previous owners had changed the operating circuits, however, so that it slid down, dark toward the night side of Earth, with all signals dead except a gong to arouse its master. The peddler woke unhappy. Even the dim lights in its tiny little cabin seemed intolerably bright, and the gong was bursting his head. He shuffled hastily to stop it, and would stumble through the fire in search of something to drink. There should have been another bottle cached somewhere against such emergencies, behind his berth, or in his portable sales case, or perhaps in the empty medical cabinet. He had long ago buttered its contents for whiskey. But the caches had all been raided before. Muttering bitterly, shaking with a thirst that refused to wait, he staggered back to the cockpit and touched the dial to find out where he was. Sol 3. He'd never heard of that. He shook his throbbing head and squinted at the hooded screen to read his position. The coordinates took his breath. He was 2,000 light years from the last world he remembered, somewhere near the dead center of the civilization. He felt shocked for an instant at the vastness of his blunder. Yet there was no harm done. That was the unique advantage of his nomadic existence. No matter how many outraged citizens wanted to remodel his nose and extirpate his thirst, the fire had always carried him safely beyond their reach, across space and trackless time. He leaned hopefully to read the screen again. Sol 3 was a minor member of an undistinguished planetary system, it told him, with nothing interesting in a tourist or trader. The inhabitants were human, but the culture was primitive. Although long settled, the planet was historically unimportant. A footnote caught his eye. The planet was once believed to have been the site of Atlantis, the half-legendary cradle of civilization from which the interstellar migrations began. Although the comparative biology of the indigenous fauna support this idea, no actual historical proof has yet been found, and the low cultural level of the present inhabitants leaves it open to question. He wasn't concerned with the elaborate quarrels of his historians. All he wanted was a drink, just one stiff jolt to cut the foul taste out of his mouth and sweep the pain from his head and quiet his trembling limbs. Even this planet couldn't be too backward, he thought, to distill alcohol. Thirstily, he touched the landing key. The gong rang instantly, painful as a hammer on his head. The red light flickered and the loud recorded voice of the automatic pilot rang grimly. Warning, do not attempt to land. This planet is quarantined under the covenants of non-contact. All communication is absolutely prohibited and violators will be subject to full rehabilitation. Warning. Cringing from the voice in the gong, he stabbed frantically at the cancellation button. Because primitive worlds offered the easiest market for his goods, he had run into the covenants before. He knew they were intended to prevent the damaging clash of peoples at discrepant levels of social evolution, but he was not interested in theories of cultural impact. What he wanted was a drink, and he should find it here. Though he'd never heard of Sol 3, he knew his trade, and he was well enough equipped. One quick stand-on to bring the price of what he needed for the long flight back to the frontier was where he felt at home. Even if something aroused the quarantine officials, the threat of full rehabilitation was unlikely to pursue him quite that far. He pushed the landing key. The fire slipped down silently before dawn to the dark side of a wooded hill 3 miles from a feeble energy force that should be a small settlement. He inflated the covering mainframe that gave the craft the look of an innocent boulder, started walking towards the settlement with his sales equipment. The cool air had a refreshing scent of things growing. The feel of grass was good underfoot, and the voice of small wild creatures made an elusive music. No wilderness ever seemed so friendly. He thought this planet had really been the birthplace of mankind, and he felt happy for a moment with a mystical sense of return. But he hadn't come for communication with the mother world, and their brief relation slipped away as he began to worry about meeting some primitive taboo against the use of alcohol. Fronting on anxiety, he came to an empty road at the foot of the hill and tramped along it with an apprehensive haste towards a rude concrete bridge across a shallow stream. The sun was rising now, that was different than any other star. It showed him a wide green valley where a herd of black and white domestic animals grazed peacefully, and a man in blue drove a crude traction plow. The peddler paused for a moment, feeling a puzzled contempt for the stupid yokels who lived their small lives rooted here, as ignorant of the great world outside as their fat cattle were. If envy lay beneath his scorn, he didn't know it. The sunlight had begun to hurt his eyes, and his thirst shook him again with a dry paroxysm. He limped grimly on. Behind the bridge, he found crude two-dimensional signs set up along the road. He had no equipment to read their silent legends, but even the flat pictures of sealed bottles and dew-wet glasses spoke to him with a maddening eloquence. At the summit of a gentle hill, he came upon a wooden hut, enveloped in a thin but tantalizing fragrance of alcohol. The sign above the door convinced him this was a public place, and the faded poster on the wall showed a plump native girl sipping a drink seductively. He tried the door eagerly, but it was locked. The teasing odor tempted him to break in, but he shrank from the impulse fearfully. Running the quarantine was crime enough. He didn't want to be rehabilitated, and he thought the place would surely open by the time he could supply himself with a local medium of exchange. Already perspiring, he went down the hill towards the village. Lay along the bend of the quiet stream he had passed, a scattered group of rude brick and stucco family huts standing in a grove of trees. Looked so different from the brawl and glitter of the raw pioneer cities he had known that he halted uncertainly. He wasn't used to dealing with such simple races. Butt-ends analyses would certainly be news to their children, and the occasional discarded cans and balls before the road assured them that alcohol was abundant. That was really all that mattered. He mopped his face and swung the sales case to his left hand and staggered on again. "Morning to you, mister." Startled by the unexpected hail, he darted to the side of the road. A clumsy primitive vehicle kept coming up behind him. It was driven by some kind of crude heat engine, which gave off a faint reek of burning petroleum. A large man sat at the control wheel, watching him with a disturbing curiosity. "Looking for somebody in the Chatsworth?" The man spoke a harsh sounding tongue he had never heard before, but the silent translator, a tiny device no more conspicuous than his hearing aid, brought the meaning to him instantly. "Morning to you, mister." He lifted his arm a little, murmuring towards the microphone hidden in his sleeve, and his translated reply came from the tiny speaker on his clothing, uttered in a nasal drawl that matched the natives. "Thanks," he said, "but I'm just passing through." "Then hop in." The native leans opened the door of the vehicle. "Give a lift out to my place, a mile across the town." He got in gratefully, but in a moment he was sorry for his eagerness. "Welcome to Chatsworth," the grinning yokel went on. "Population 304 in the richest little valley in the state. Guess I got the right to make you welcome." The tall man chuckled. "I'm Judd Hankins, the constable." Now sweat broke out in the peddler's dusty face. His head throbbed unbearably, and his gnarled old hands began trembling so violently he had to grip the handle of his case to keep the officer from noticing his agitation. In a moment, however, he saw that this unfortunate chance encounter with the law had not yet been disastrous. Judd Hankins was unlikely to be concerned with enforcing the covenants, if he ever knew that they existed. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Hankins," the peddler answered hastily, grateful the translator failed to reproduce the apprehensive tenor in his voice. "My name's Gray." It was the constable looking at his sales case. "A fertile valley indeed," he said hurriedly. "Do you produce grain for the distilling industry?" "Mostly for hogs." The constable glanced at the case again. Is you a salesman, Mr. Gray?" Uneasily, he said he was. "What's your line, if you don't mind?" "Toys," he said. "Novelty ties." "I was just afraid you had fireworks." The constable seemed faintly relieved. "Think I ought to warn you." "Fireworks?" The peddler repeated the term in a puzzled voice, because the translation had not been entirely clear. "The force will be coming up soon, you know," the constable explained. We've got to protect the children." He grinned proudly. "I've 4 fine little rascals of my own." The peddler still wasn't sure about fireworks. The force was obviously some sort of barbaric ceremonial in which children were sacrificed, and fireworks were probably paraphernalia for the witch doctors. Anyhow, it didn't matter. "These toys are all I sell," he insisted. "They're highly educational, designed and recommended by child training experts to instruct while they amuse. Safe enough for children in the proper age groups." He squinted sharply at the amiable constable. "But I'm not sure about offering them here," he uttered uneasily. "So small a place that might not pay me to buy a license." "You don't need one," the constable chuckled disarmingly. "You see, we aren't incorporated. Not a point of our sort of town. Go ahead and sell your toys. Just say nothing that will hurt the children." He slowed the vehicle to call a genial greeting to a group of children playing a ball in a vacant lot, stopped in the village to let a boy and his dog cross the street ahead. The peddler thanked him and got out hastily. "Wait, Mr. Gray," he protested. "You had breakfast?" The peddler said he hadn't. "Then jump in again," the jovial native urged. "Mammy is plenty on the table. She cooks it up while I do the chores out in the farm. Seeing you're doing business in town, I want you to come out and eat with us." "Thanks," he said, "but all I really want is something to drink." "Guess you are dry walking in this dust," the native nodded sympathetically. "Come on out, and we'll give you a drink." Tempted by that promise and afraid of offending the law, he got back in the machine. The constable drove on to a neat, white-painted hut at the edge of the town. 4 noisy children ran out to welcome, and a clean, plump-faced woman went to the door. "My wife," the constable drawled jovially. "Mr. Gray. Sort of early bird Santa Claus," he says, with toys for the kiddies. "He'd like a drink." The peddler came into the kitchen center of the hut, which looked surprisingly clean. He reached with a trembling anxiety for the drink the woman brought him. It had the bright, clear color of grain alcohol, and he almost strangled in his bitter surprise when he found it was only cold water. He thanked the woman as civilly as he could manage, and said he had to go. The children were clamoring to see his toys, however, and the constable urged him to stay for breakfast. He sat down reluctantly and sipped at a cup of hot, bitter liquid called coffee, which really seemed to help his headache. Still afraid of the friendly constable, he made excuses not to show the toys until the children had to leave the school. The smallest girl began to sneeze and sniffle as the mother hurried them towards the door and inquired with some alarm what was going on. "Just a cold," the woman said. "Nothing serious." That puzzled him for an instant, because the weather seemed quite warm. Probably another error in translation, but nothing to alarm him. He was rising to follow the children outside, but the woman turned back to him. "Don't go yet, Mr. Gray," he smiled kindly. "I'm afraid you aren't well. You hardly touched your ham and eggs. Let me get you another cup of coffee." He sat down again, unwillingly. Perhaps he wasn't well, but he expected to feel worse until he had a drink of something better than cold water. "Can't we do something for him, Judd?" The woman had turned to her husband. "He doesn't look able to be out on the road alone without a soul to do for him. Can't you think of something?" "Well," the constable set fire to the end of a small white tube and inhaled the smoke with a reflective expression. "We still don't have a janitor at the school. I'm a trustee, and I'll say it's the words of the principal if you want the job." "You could stay here with us," the woman added. "There's a nice clean bed in the attic. Your board won't cost a cent, as long as you're willing to do a jobs around the place. Would you like that?" He squinted at her uncertainly. To his own surprise, he wanted to stay. He wasn't used to kindness, and it filled his eyes with tears. The infinite chasm of open space seemed suddenly even more dark and cold and dreadful than it was. For an instant he hungered fiercely for the quiet peace of his forgotten world. Perhaps its spell would hold him and heal all his restless discontent. "You're welcome here," the constable was urging. "If you've got a business head, you can find more than jobs to do. They will find a luckier spot than Chatsworth if you want to settle down." "I don't know." He picked up his empty cup absently. "I'm really glad you want me, but I'm afraid it's been too long." He stopped flinching when he saw the woman looking at his nose. Her eyes fell, as if out of pity, but in a moment she spoke. I do hope you'll let us help you, Mr. Gray." She hesitated again. Her plump face flushed and he began to hate her. "Her brother said he was a plastic surgeon," she went on resolutely. "He's taught a lot of, misfits into very successful people. He's really very good and not high at all. If we decide to stay, I'm sure we can manage something." He set the empty cup down quickly because his hands were shaking again. He was still alert enough to recognize the old trap, even in his determined gaze. He didn't want to be rehabilitated, and he meant to keep his nose. "Well, Mr. Gray," the constable was drawling, "want to see the principal?" "I'd like to," he grinned wanly to cover his shivering panic, "if you just show me where to find him. And you've both been very kind." "Don't mention what the constable said. I'm driving to the farm, and I'll take you by the school." But he didn't talk to the principal. He'd seen the trap, and he was still crafty enough to escape it. He started walking towards the building as the constable drove away, limping along as soberly as if he had already been rehabilitated. But he stopped outside, behind a hedge, to make his pitch. He unlocked the battered case, set it up on the extended legs, and lighted the three-dimensional displays. The children gathered on the playground were already pausing the games to look at him, and when the sonic music began, they flocked around him instantly. His toys were the cheapest possible trinkets, mass-produced from common materials, but they were cleverly packaged, and their ingenious designs reflected the advanced technology of the industrial planet where they were made. The small plastic boxes were gay with universal psionic labels, which reacted to attention with animated stereo-colored scenes and changing labels which seemed to be printed in each worker's own language. "Come in closer, kiddies." He picked up the first little pile of mind-read boxes and began juggling them with a sudden dexterity of twisted little fingers, so they rose and fell in time to the racing psionic melody. "Look, kiddies, a wonderful educational toy. Use it to demonstrate the great practical principles of meteorology and neutronics. The Little Wonder Weather Wizard Blizzard Maker set works by turning part of the energy air several miles around into radiant neutrinos. Sudden chilling causes precipitation, and the outflow of cold air creates a brief but effective blizzard. The label tells you all about it. Step right up, kiddies. Buy them at a half bargain price. Only 25 cents each, or 3 for $1. But we really shouldn't, mister. The man who interrupted looked familiar, and he recognized the constable's oldest son. Well, most of us have as our lunch money. We aren't supposed to spend it. Don't you worry, kid, he answered quickly. If you're going home hungry, you'll have your money's worth. Never saw any toys like these. Only 15 cents to close them out. Come right up and buy them now, because I won't be here tomorrow. He scooped up the coins from grubby little hands. But don't start making storms just now, he warned hastily. We don't want trouble with the teachers, do we, kiddies? Better keep them in your pockets until school is out. Sorry, Sonny, that's all the blizzard makers. But look at this. Pick up the next stack of small plastic boxes. The Junior Giant G Gravitator Kit. Fascinating experiments in gravitational inversion. Learn the facts of basic science and amaze your friends. It began passing out the boxes. The bright psionic labels looked blank at first, but they came to shining life when the 5 eyes of their children responded to the thoughts of each. Most of them pictured the harmless decapitation of such small objects as marbles and tadpoles. But he glimpsed one showing how to connect the device to the foundations of the school building, another in which the astonished principal himself was falling upward towards open space. Wait a moment, Sonny, he whispered hurriedly. Let's not gravitate anything until after school is out. Sorry, laddie, I sold his Junior Giants, but there's something else that's just as educational and really better fun. He held up a great detective and annihilator pistol pencil. Looks like an ordinary writing instrument, but the eraser really erases. It converts solid matter into invisible neutrinos. All you do is point it and press the clip. You can blow holes in walls and make objects disappear and fool your friends, all for one thin dime. The school bell began to ring as he handed out the annihilators and gathered up the dimes. Just one more item, kiddies, before you go to class. He turned up the sonic amplifier and raised his rusty voice. Something I know you're all going to want. An exciting experiment with real atomic energy you can try at home. He poured bright little spheres out of a carton into the palm of his hand. Look at them, kiddies. Planet Blaster fusion bomb capsules, super duper size. All you do is drop one capsule in a bucket of water and wait for it to dissolve. The reaction fuses the hydrogen atoms in the water into helium. The free instructional leaflet tells you how the same reaction makes the stars shine. Buy them now before you go to class. Add realism to your playground battles and flabbergast your friends. Make your own fusion bombs. Only 5 cents each. 3 for $1 if you buy them now. Say, mister. Constable's son had bought 3 capsules, but now he stood peering at them uneasily. These little pills make real atom bombs. Aren't they dangerous? Even more than fireworks. Wouldn't know about fireworks, the peddler scowled impatiently. But those toys are safe enough. If you've had your psionic preconditioning, I hope you all know enough not to set off fusion bombs indoors. He glanced at the bewildered boy and lifted his rasping voice. Your last chance, kiddie, but I won't be here when you get out of school. Write down these genuine fusion bombs capsules are going two for a nickel. 1 for 2 cents, sonny, if that's all you got. He swept in the last sweaty coppers. And that's all, kiddies. Turned out the swimming displays and stopped the sounding moving and folded up the stand. Children followed into the schoolhouse and he hurried back across to the village. The tavern on the hill was open when he came back to it, and the scent of alcohol brought back all his thirst, so intense that his whole body shuddered. He was spreading out his music on the bar when the blare of native music startled him. The raw notes sawed his nerves, too loud and queerly meaningless. He turned to scowl at the bulky machine from which they came, wondering what made them seem so flat and dead. After a moment of puzzled noise, he realized that the music was sound alone, with no psionic overtones. Were these people ignorant of psionics? It seemed impossible that even the covenants of non-contact could exude all knowledge of such a basic science. Yet when he thought of it, he couldn't recall seeing any psionic device at all. The bartender ought to know. Well, mister, what do you have? Tell me, he whispered huskily, do your schools here teach psionics? The man's startled expression should have been answer enough, but he wasn't looking at it. He'd seen his own reflection in the mirror behind the bar. The hard, narrow, bloodless face, the shrinking chin, the shifting, hollowed, bloodshot eyes, and the huge, crooked nose. Huh? The bartender was staring. What did you say? But his voice was gone. These people didn't know psionics, so anything he said would give him away. The fire would be discovered, and he could never leave. He would be rehabilitated. White and weak with panic, he pushed a heap of coins across the bar. Whiskey, he gasped. All this will buy. Bartender took an endless time to count the coins, but they bought 6 bottles. He crammed them in an empty case and hurried out of the bar. As they came at last, footsore and dusty, back across the bridge and up the hills where he left the flyer. His breath sobbed out when he stumbled through the trees and saw the empty spot behind the rock. Dismay shook him. He thought the fire was gone, so he turned and recognized its inflative camouflage. Trembling with a sleep weakness, he found the psionic key and tried to deflate the membrane. The key didn't work. He tried again, but still the standard fabric remained hard as actual rock. He ran frantically around it, trying the key against a dozen different spots. None of them responded. He was locked out. He couldn't understand it, and he had to have a drink. He was trying to wait until he was safe aboard, with his new destination dialed on the automatic pilot, but suddenly he felt too cold and hopeless to make any effort without the warming aid of alcohol. He couldn't even think. He stooped to open the sales case where he put the whiskey, but the psionic key failed again. It fell out of his fingers when he realized what was wrong. Psionic and neutronic devices suddenly got out of order, but they could be disabled. The fire must have been discovered by somebody from the quarantine station. Sick with panic, he tried to get away. He dropped the case and ran wildly off into the unfamiliar wilderness. His staggering fight must have led him in a circle, however, for at last he came reeling back to a hill and a rock that looked the same. His head was light by that time, his twitching limbs hot with fever. He was clawing feebly at the stiffened membrane, helplessly trying to tear away with his bleeding fingers, when he heard firm footsteps behind him and turned to see the stolid, sunburned figure of Constable Judd Hankins. Well, Constable, he leaned giddily back against the camouflage, grinning with a sick relief that this was not a quarantine inspector. His translator failed to work at first, but he spoke for him as he fumbled to adjust the instrument for his clothing. I gave up, he muttered dully. I'll go back with you. A chill began to shake him when his raw throat felt too painful for speech. I wanted to settle down, if they'll only leave my nose alone. There was something else he wanted to say, but his ears were roaring and his bones ached, and he could barely stand. He felt too sick for a moment to remember anything, but at last it came back to him. The toys, he sobbed, they're dangerous. Not any longer, the tall man told him curtly. We slapped psionic and neutronic inhibitors on this whole area to prevent accidents, before I borrowed the identity of Constable Hankins to pick them up. You, he stared blankly, you are a quarantine inspector from Seoul Station. The officer flashed a psionic badge. You were detected before you landed. We delayed the arrest to be certain you had no Confederates. He felt too ill to be astonished. You got me, he mumbled faintly. Go ahead and give me a full rehab. Too late for that, the stern man straightened impatiently. You're all alike, you quarantine breakers. You always forget that cultural impact strikes both ways. Never understand the covenants exist partly for your own protection. He shook his throbbing head. I know you were not processed to our clinic at the station, the inspector rapped, so you didn't even bring a medical kit. But you land here among people so primitive malignant microorganisms are allowed to breed among them with no protection for yourself whatsoever. Clinic? One word was all he really caught, but he stiffened defensively. You can do what else you like, he whispered doggedly, but I mean to keep my nose. You have bigger troubles now, the inspector studied him regretfully. I suppose my ancestors were naturally immune the way these people are, but I'd be dead in half a day if I hadn't been immunized against 1,000 viruses and germs. You've already picked them up. He stood wheezing for his breath, squinting painfully against the light. People I met were well enough, he protested stupidly. One child had something called a cold, but the woman said it wasn't dangerous. Not to her, the inspector said. No more than atomic fusion bombs are to you. Uncomprehending, he swayed and fell. The end.